ever thought about the problems we face just getting to the office? Of course you have. I mean, there must be millions of us making the same old journey every day, right? We're not stuck in some traffic jam. We're catching a cold waiting for a train that hasn't turned up, or breaking a leg running for a bus we've just missed. Mind you, if we do get to the office in one piece, are we going to be any better off? Made it. Well, we all do, don't we? Somehow. And once we're inside, we can relax. I mean, what could go wrong now? Excuse me. We reach the safety of our desks, sit down, have a nice cup of coffee, and start to think about the day ahead. But you know, there are some people who just don't see it that way. Now, Don is a customer liaison chap. Most of his liaison is done over the telephone, which happens to be just as well for the customers. Don's the sort of person who's never late, but always thinks he might be. So wherever he goes, he rushes, just in case. Eileen works in accounts, does a bit of typing, a bit of filing, that sort of thing. Eileen is often late, but then she's got other things to think about. I mean, there's Nigel, for instance. Now, he may not be Robert Redford, but he has got an orange sports car. And after all, a girl's got to look her best. And then there's Simon. He works in marketing, but then he would, wouldn't he? Of course, he knows that jumping off a moving bus is dangerous, but you see, Simon's an individual, which means he likes to do things his own way. And this is where they all work. Well, perhaps I better not mention the name. It's a fairly large company, and amongst other things, they make greeting cards, you know, happy birthday, bon voyage, all that. Now, the problem is, when Don, Eileen, and Simon start work, there's a sudden demand for get well cards.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Dear, oh dear. And you know, it's the same every morning. There you are, expecting a nice quiet day, when along comes Don and causes more havoc than a coachload of tourists in Harrods. He knows better, of course. But, well, the job comes first. If he had to think about every move he made, he wouldn't get anything done, would he? But if you're beginning to think that with Don around, you'd be safer jogging in the fast lane of a motorway, you haven't worked with Eileen. Eileen's problem is that she simply doesn't care. Mind you, she ought to. The boss makes that quite clear. Can't be around every 5 minutes, of course, but when they do have their little conversations...
Ow!
Eileen has her own little way of making them memorable.
I've nearly stabbed myself on those. I really think it's unnecessary. If this desk was a little bit tidier, we wouldn't be having all this problem. And I've told you time and time again that you should keep this...
It won't do any good. Eileen firmly believes that accidents, serious ones that is, just don't happen. Most of them are trivial and happen to other people.
Clean from now on. I'm fed up telling you.
Anyway, hasn't her boss just proved that? Eileen goes through each day creating hazards for other people to find. And what makes things worse is that other people are really very good at finding them. See what I mean? And all because Eileen doesn't care. About the things that matter, that is.
No.
Simon, on the other hand, cares a great deal, but still manages to create hazards.
Okay.
Now, here's an example of how alert Simon is.
What's the problem?
He sees somebody in distress and steps into their rescue. He knows, of course, that you don't go around moving office furniture once it's positioned, but Simon likes to make everybody's life easier. What's wrong with that, you say? We'll come back to that in a moment.
Oh, it looks all right that side.
This young lady has already told Simon that the typewriter is brand new, still under warranty, and cost the company about £1,000.
It looks all right.
But, well, Simon does know about these things.
Maybe it's the tape under there. Maybe it's the mains.
Ah, Simon thinks he has the answer. No need to send it back.
Right, let's have a look.
Must be the fuse that's gone. So, to make sure it doesn't go again, we'll put in a bigger one. The trouble is, our Simon has got that fatal combination. A plausible story on the one hand, and a screwdriver in the other. It's quite surprising that Simon on this occasion hasn't got a bigger fuse in his pocket. Anyway, this paper clip will do. In the end, Simon always leaves people with more problems than they started out with. But nobody realizes it at the time. So there we are. 3 reasons for thinking we're all a lot safer staying in bed. Recognize anyone? No, of course not. I mean, no one could go around behaving like those 3 and get away with it, could they? Mind you, if that's true, if those 3 characters don't exist, then who causes more than 5,000 serious accidents in offices every year? Now, I'm not blaming anybody, but if we were really honest, wouldn't we admit that maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of the Dons, the Eileens, and the Simons in every one of us? Look, don't we all get busy now and again? There we are, quietly working away when... Hello? Yes, Richard, hold on. Just got him out here. Yeah. Hold on. Ron. Yes. Yeah, hold on. I'll get it here. Oh, damn. What? I'm sorry, Dave. Sorry. Can I call you back in a minute? Thanks. And how many of us get a little too familiar with the things we use, eh? Well, can't be much wrong. Machines like this are always playing up, aren't they? And isn't there always a way to put them right? Like the little kick we give to the plug on the Hoover at home, or that delicate little knock on top of the TV set. You see how easy it is to have an accident. And it only takes a moment. All right. We've all had a bit of a laugh. But 5,000 serious accidents mean that 5,000 people didn't find it that funny. But there are only 2 accidents that we should really try and prevent. The one that happens to us, and the one we cause to happen to someone else. So how can we spot the hazards that create these 2 accidents? And what can we do about them? Here's a fairly typical office. Recognize it? Recognize it now? These are a few of the hazards you can find in most offices every single day. Now, the danger is obvious when we see them like this. But when we're working, we never really see them at all. But they're there, and any one of them could cause an accident. And I'll bet there's still some of you saying, come off it, you'll be telling us next we could end up in hospital tripping over a matchstick. You're right. Here we go. 1 pencil. Yes, all right, I know it's not a matchstick, but it's not much bigger, is it? Now, this one happens to be lying in the middle of the gangway. So if you did trip over it, you might be lucky, and all you'd end up with is a round of applause from your mates. But if you tripped over it now, same pencil, same trip. But it could have produced a very different result. It's worth remembering that trips, falls and collisions account for over half of all office injuries. But before we get into that, what about the person who left this lot up there in the first place? Books like this one contain details of the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. I'm not going to get involved in a lot of legal jargon, but what this means is creating hazards like that could be illegal. At the same time, that cupboard itself could be illegal. Confused? Right. Have a look at this. The law says an employer has to provide a safe place of work and take reasonable care for the health and safety of all his or her employees. Things like this could lead to a prosecution. But does your employer always know about these things? If he doesn't, then you must tell him. And if you don't, you could be breaking the law. Because every employee has the responsibility to take reasonable care for his own safety and the safety of others. You see, the law works both ways. Responsibility for safety rests on both employer and employee. But do we really need a law to tell us what we already know? That preventing accidents is only common sense, or should be, but some of us might forget. So this is around to remind us. I've already mentioned that trips, falls and collisions account for over half of all office accidents. So if we can eliminate those hazards, we're more than halfway towards a safer office, aren't we? But there are other things we've all got to watch out for. The things we handle, for instance. Drawing pins, paper. They can all cause accidents, sometimes nasty ones. If you've ever cut yourself on a piece of paper, you'd know what I was talking about. And then there are the more obvious things. Scissors, knives. Again, they can also cause accidents, if we allow them to. Handling also involves lifting, and well, we've all got our own little ways of going about it. This is the Eileen's Special. Not very efficient, is it? Or safe. Did you know that lifting properly is not only safer, it doesn't strain the back? Watch this. She's checking first for any sharp edges. She draws the load well into her body, hands underneath, knees bent, back straight, and away she goes. When we put things down, the principles are the same as when lifting. Bend the knees and keep the back straight. We should all try and keep a straight back even when we're not lifting. And stretching the back could be as harmful as bending it. In this kind of situation, try and get up to a sensible working height by using a proper platform. Here's another thing we handle. Machinery. Machinery causes quite a few accidents each year. Many of them serious, some even fatal. But again, we can avoid these accidents. After all, a machine like this is simple and safe to operate, provided we follow the instructions. Mind you, in a modern office, a lot of machines aren't always this simple. How about these? Stuff full of microchips and Lord knows what. Of course, in about 10 years' time, they'll be out of date and on the scrap heap. Mind you, a lot of accidents can happen in 10 years. And let's be honest, with this stuff around, accidents do happen. You see what I mean? New technology. But almost all the accidents that happened around it are as old as the hills. Trips, falls, collisions, pushing it, pulling it, and fiddling with it. But I'm not suggesting you just shove modern machines into a corner, plug them in, and forget about them. One of the most talked about problems, particularly with television screens, is eye fatigue. Now, although eye fatigue isn't a serious problem, it can be prevented by following a few basic rules. The sighting of the machine. Make sure the screen is kept away from any direct sunlight. A lot of the newer machines have adjustable screens, so adjust them to a position that suits you. Brightness controls. They're for our benefit, so let's use them. And get into the habit of cleaning the screen at least once a week. But make sure you use the right cleaning agent. The way we sit. Is the chair at the correct height, at the most comfortable distance from the screen? Sitting too close can be as bad as sitting too far away. And, have you been trained to operate a machine like this? If you haven't, you'd better check with your employer, because training in the use of any machine is a legal requirement. The last thing we want to do is fiddle with machinery if it goes wrong. If there is an obvious fault, turn it off straight away, take out the plug, and make sure to leave a clear warning for others. Finally, report the fault to your supervisor. Fire. Potentially the most serious office accident of all. And fires don't just happen, they're caused. Of course, Don knows that a fire is serious, but what he doesn't realize is that the way he dashes about might just cause one. Eileen also knows about the dangers of fire, although you'd never think it. All right, I'll admit Simon never misses. And he's never yet caused a fire. But there's always a first time. You see, fires are really very easy to start. Of course, preventing one from starting in the first place is easier still. What is not always so easy is remembering what we should do about a fire should one occur. If you discover a fire, the first thing to do, sound the alarm. Secondly, if you've been trained to use a fire extinguisher, use it. But make sure it's the right one for the job. Above all, don't try and be a hero. If the fire looks too big for you to handle, leave it. Now, it may be that your company policy is to appoint fire wardens, say, one to each office or floor. So, if you don't know how to use one of these, or one of these, it may not be a problem, because there will be somebody near you who does know. Of course, it would help if you found out who he or she was. Two important things to remember. If you have any doubts about what to do in case of fire, ask. And when it comes to firefighting equipment, whether you know how to use it or not, treat it with respect. Things like that contravene the fire regulations, as well as the Health and Safety at Work Act. All right. I'm sure we'd all admit that interfering with anything that might save lives is just plain stupid. But you'd be surprised just how often things like that occur. Okay, I know it'd only take a few seconds to move a ladder or shift a few boxes, but where fire is concerned, seconds could be vital. Now, someone's discovered a fire. They've sounded the alarm. What about the rest of us? Now, Don knows all about the emergency evacuation procedure, about leaving whatever he's doing, and... Oh, well, that's it then. To spend the next 10 minutes rushing around trying to sort out an anxious customer and probably fall over something while he's doing it. Come on, Eileen, it's not a practice or an alarm test. They happen on Mondays. Ah, well, after all that, Eileen's finally going to... look out of the window. She obviously wants to be the first to see the fire engines arrive. This is more like it. Simon recognizes that there may be a real problem and is actually doing something about it. Well done, that man. Any second now, he's going to spoil it all. See what I mean? Simon actually believes that by wedging open the fire door, he's making life easier and doing everyone a favor. But that's not all. The official assembly point is in the company car park, which in fact Simon has to cross in order to get to his assembly point, the private bar of the Dog and Duck. You know, it would be quite funny if the results of that kind of behavior weren't so serious, or happened quite so often. So, how should it be done? When you hear the alarm, never assume it's a practice. Do something about it. Whatever you're working on, leave it. Move quietly and calmly towards the fire exits, closing doors and windows behind you. Never block fire doors or wedge them open. It can kill. Whatever you do, stay calm and never run, especially on stairs. When you reach your assembly point, stay there until your name has been checked and you've been told to move. If you don't, and this were a real fire, it would be assumed that you were still inside the building, and the fireman could well risk his life trying to find you. So, the important thing is, know the correct procedure, and then make sure you follow it.
Oh!
Ah.
The ankle.
Would you believe Don's just fallen over? Well, not surprising, is it? Anyway, he hasn't actually broken anything. And Eileen has cut her finger on a knife which she found while searching in her drawer for some letters. As for Simon, well, he's just fallen off that chair whilst reaching for a box of stationery. Yes, he should have known better, but you can't tell Simon things like that. All right, I know I've been talking about how to avoid having or causing an accident. But after all, we are only human. Even the best of us could end up with a bruised ankle, a cut finger, or a bump on the head. The point is, having an injury is one thing, making it worse is something else. And that's where this chap comes in. Or rather, this chap.
How did you come to do this then?
The law requires an employer to provide first aid equipment and, depending on the number of his employees, a responsible person to look after it, or a trained first aider. Now, I know that sometimes we get embarrassed if we do something silly like cut a finger or bruise an ankle, but we could make things worse by doing nothing about it.
Hello, yes?
Or going in for do-it-yourself surgery. A first aider is there to help. So let's help him by reporting any injury, however trivial we may think it is.
This is the accident report form.
And remember, reporting accidents isn't only common sense. It's also a legal requirement. There are also one or two other ways we can help our first aider. Misusing first aid equipment is as much an offence as blocking a fire exit. And let's face it, someone may need it in a hurry. You may need it in a hurry. Well, that's about it. I've shown you some of the obvious hazards that might cause an accident. There are lots of others. What you've got to do is look for them. Yeah, knocking off time. It's been a pretty exhausting day. I'll tell you what, though, if we do want to prevent accidents, now's a good time to start. Let's check before we go home that everything is in its right place. The drawers, cupboards, and cabinets are closed. That all machinery is switched off and plugs removed. The cables and anything else that might cause a trip are tucked out of harm's way. And let's make sure that cigarette ends are kept in the proper place and not just chucked in waste bins. And when we've done that, a final check for any other hazard we may have missed. It may seem a lot to ask, but it need only take a couple of moments. Get into the habit, it won't even take that long. Of course, there are some people who don't have the time or the interest to get into good habits. They'll just carry on with the bad ones they've already got. Oh, Simon could get prosecuted for willful negligence, and Don could end up having a really serious accident, and Eileen could end up causing one. But even then, the chances are they'd put it down to a bit of bad luck. Not really good enough, is it? So, that gives us a choice. We either follow their example or learn from it. Right, I'm off. Well, this, I told you about the demand for get well cards. I mean, 5,000 accidents a year. Someone's bound to need cheering up. Maybe even you. Oh, if it is you, get well soon, won't you?